The plane descended through a veil of soft clouds, revealing Colombia below in layers of green, gold, and distant city lights. Keanu Reeves sat quietly by the window, watching the landscape come into focus, feeling that familiar mix of curiosity and caution that accompanied travel to unfamiliar places. Beside him, his wife rested with her eyes closed, one hand loosely wrapped around his, the steady pressure grounding them both after a long journey. This trip was meant to be simple. No premieres, no interviews, no cameras waiting behind barricades. Colombia was supposed to offer something rare: privacy, a brief escape from the constant awareness that followed them everywhere else. They had chosen the hotel carefully, drawn by its reputation for discretion and elegance, a place that promised calm amid the energy of the city. As they stepped out into the warm evening air, the scent of rain and blooming trees greeted them. The city pulsed softly in the distance, alive but not overwhelming. A driver led them to a waiting car, and soon they were moving through streets lined with glowing storefronts, murals painted with history and color, and people gathered in quiet conversations at roadside cafes. Neither of them spoke much during the drive. It wasn't silence born of tension, but of shared understanding. Moments like this were rare, and both wanted to preserve the calm for as long as possible. The hotel rose ahead of them, modern and imposing yet elegant, its glass facade reflecting the city lights like a polished mirror. Inside, the lobby was expansive marble floors, high ceilings, soft music floating through the air. Guests moved casually, laughter blending with the rhythmic echo of footsteps. At first glance, everything felt exactly as promised. Keanu approached the reception desk with a polite nod, offering a quiet greeting. His wife stood beside him, relaxed, taking in the space. They expected a routine exchange, names confirmed, keys handed over, a courteous welcome. Instead, there was a pause, a prolonged one. The receptionist frowned slightly at the screen. Fingers. The pause stretched longer than expected, subtle enough to be dismissed, yet noticeable enough to shift the atmosphere. Keanu remained patient. He had learned long ago that frustration rarely improved situations, especially in places. A staff member finally looked up, not with welcome, but with uncertainty edged by irritation. A question was asked, short, clipped. Keanu answered calmly. Another glance was exchanged behind the desk. It was a small moment, the kind most people would forget within minutes, but sometimes it was precisely these small moments that marked the beginning of something much larger. Neither Keanu nor his wife could have known it yet, but their quiet arrival in Colombia was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would test patience, dignity, and the fragile line between misunderstanding and confrontation. The receptionist cleared his throat and asked the question again, this time slower, as though volume might compensate for confusion. The words were polite enough, but the tone carried an edge that hadn't been there before. Keanu listened carefully, nodding as he processed the request. It was about the reservation dates, room type, a name that appeared slightly different in the system. He explained calmly, keeping his voice even. The booking had been made weeks in advance through a private service, confirmed twice. He reached into his jacket and produced the printed confirmation, sliding it gently across the counter. His wife leaned in, pointing quietly at the dates highlighted in bold. Another pause followed. The staff member studied the paper, then the screen, then the paper again. A second employee joined them, speaking rapidly in Spanish. Their voices were low but urgent, hands gesturing toward the monitor. Keanu did not understand the words, but he understood the energy. What should have been routine now felt complicated. I'm sure we can sort it out, he said softly, offering a reassuring smile. Instead of easing the tension, the response seemed to irritate one of the staff members. A sigh escaped, audible this time. The employee straightened, voice rising just enough to draw attention from a nearby guest. The misunderstanding, it seemed, was no longer just technical, it had become personal. Keanu's wife shifted closer to him, her earlier calm replaced by uncertainty. She spoke gently, asking if there was someone else who could help, someone who might speak more slowly or review the confirmation again. Her request was respectful, careful not to offend. The response came sharper than expected. The staff member insisted the reservation did not match policy. Words like rules and procedures were repeated, louder now, as if authority itself needed to be asserted. The explanation was fragmented, partially lost in translation, but the implication was clear. The issue was being placed squarely on them. Keanu felt the shift immediately. He kept his posture relaxed, hands open at his sides, signaling cooperation. He had learned through years of travel and experience. That calm could be contagious, but in this moment, it failed to spread. Other guests slowed as they passed the desk, sensing something off. A glance here, a lingering look there. The lobby, once a neutral space, began to feel exposed. "This is probably just a system error," Keanu said, choosing his words carefully. "We're happy to wait, because it couldn't be resolved, but because patience was wearing thin on one side." Keanu exchanged a brief look with his wife. It was unspoken, but clear. What had begun as a minor issue was slipping into something else entirely, and as the tension sharpened in the heart of the hotel lobby, neither of them realized just how public and uncomfortable the situation was about to become. The shift happened suddenly, like a door slammed by a gust of wind. One moment, the exchange hovered in uneasy uncertainty. The next, the volume rose. A staff member leaned forward, voice sharp and unmistakably louder than before. The words came fast, clipped, charged with irritation. Though Keanu didn't understand every sentence, the tone needed no translation. It cut through the lobby's soft music and echoed faintly against the marble walls. His wife stiffened beside him. Keanu raised a hand slightly, a universal gesture meant to slow things down. "There's no need to raise your voice," he said calmly, his tone steady, almost gentle. "We're just trying to understand." The request did not land as intended. Another staff member joined in, speaking over the first, frustration now openly displayed. The voices overlapped, each louder than the last, turning what should have been a private conversation into a public confrontation. A few guests stopped walking altogether. Conversations nearby fell silent. Keanu felt the familiar weight of attention settle over him. Not the controlled attention of a film set or press event, but the raw, uncomfortable awareness of being watched during a moment of conflict. His wife's fingers tightened around his arm, her breathing shallow but controlled. "This can be handled quietly," she said, her voice firm but respectful. The response came back harsher, words edged with accusation rather than explanation. A finger pointed toward the counter, then toward the couple, then back to the screen. The staff's body language spoke louder than language ever could, defensive, authoritative, unyielding. The lobby now felt smaller. Keanu remained still, grounding himself. Years of experience had taught him that reacting emotionally would only escalate things further. He lowered his voice instead, making it harder to ignore his composure against the rising noise. "We're not refusing anything," he said. "We just need clarity." The situation had crossed an invisible line. Keanu sensed the humiliation settling in, not because of the shouting itself, but because of where it was happening. Public spaces had a way of magnifying moments, stripping people of privacy even when they did nothing to invite attention. His wife's expression shifted from confusion to quiet hurt. She hadn't expected deference, only respect, and respect, in this moment, felt absent. Keanu stepped half a pace forward, positioning himself subtly between her and the desk, not confrontational, just protective. He met the staff member's gaze, unwavering but calm. "There's no reason for this," he said quietly. The words were simple, reasonable, but they arrived too late. The lobby, once filled with soft music and polite movement, now held tension thick enough to feel, and as raised voices echoed through the space, it became clear that the misunderstanding had fully transformed into something far more uncomfortable, something that would not be resolved without consequence. The shouting stopped just long enough to let the silence feel heavier than the noise that came before it. In that brief pause, the reality of the moment settled in. Keanu became acutely aware of every pair of eyes in the lobby, of the way the air itself seemed to hold its breath. His wife felt it first. Her face flushed, not with anger, but with a sharp, unexpected embarrassment. She had traveled the world, stood beside him in rooms filled with cameras and flashing lights, yet this felt different. Those moments were chosen. This one was not. Being addressed harshly, publicly, without dignity, stripped away the comfort of anonymity they had hoped for. She glanced around, meeting the curious looks of strangers, some sympathetic, others simply curious. A few people pretended not to stare, their attention hovering just out of politeness. That almost made it worse. Keanu felt a tightness in his chest, a quiet mix of disbelief and restraint. He had been criticized before, insulted even, but seeing his wife placed in this position, spoken to sharply, treated as though she were the cause of disruption, struck deeper than any personal slight ever could. He turned slightly toward her. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, though the answer wasn't entirely true. She was composed, but shaken. The humiliation lingered beneath the surface, settling into her posture. the way she folded her arms to make herself smaller. One of the staff members spoke again, voice firm and dismissive, as if the issue had already been decided. The words landed with finality, offering no room for discussion. The implication was clear. The couple was at fault, and the conversation was over. Keanu felt the injustice of it, not dramatic, not explosive, but sharp and quiet. He resisted the instinct to defend, to assert who he was, what he deserved. Fame, he knew, would only complicate things further. Respect should not require recognition. He took a measured breath. "We don't deserve to be spoken to like this," he said calmly, his voice low but steady. "We're asking for a solution, not a scene." The words hung there, unanswered. His wife looked down briefly, then back up, her eyes steady now, resolve replacing embarrassment. If they were going to be seen, she would not allow herself to look diminished. Still, the emotional bruise had already formed. Around them, the lobby slowly resumed motion, though the tension remained. People walked past again, whispers fading into murmurs. But the moment had already etched itself into memory. What should have been a simple arrival had turned into something deeply uncomfortable, an experience neither of them had anticipated. And as they stood there, exposed in a place meant to offer refuge, both Keanu and his wife realized that the night ahead would not be the peaceful beginning they had imagined. The damage, subtle but real, had already been done. The lobby never truly returned to normal, even as conversations resumed and footsteps echoed once more across the marble floor. An undercurrent of curiosity lingered. Keanu could feel it, the sideways glances, the careful attempts at discretion that failed to hide interest. A couple near the elevator whispered to each other, their eyes darting briefly toward the reception desk. Another guest slowed as they passed, phone held loosely in hand, uncertain whether to record or respect the moment. The line between privacy and spectacle blurred in real time. Keanu's wife noticed it too. The sensation of being observed pressed in on her from all sides. She straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin slightly, reclaiming what dignity the moment had threatened to strip away. But inside, the discomfort lingered, sharp and persistent. The staff behind the desk spoke again, this time in lower tones, but their expressions remained rigid. There was no apology, no softening. The lack of acknowledgement stung almost as much as the raised voices had. Keanu caught fragments of conversation from nearby guests. Speculation traveled quickly, fed by uncertainty. Some assumed the couple had done something wrong. Others guessed at privilege, entitlement, celebrity drama. None of them knew the truth, yet opinions formed effortlessly. This, Keanu realized, was how narratives were born. A man passing by murmured something to his companion, a name slipping into the air like a spark. Recognition flickered in a few faces. A woman near the entrance looked twice, then again, as if trying to confirm what she suspected. Keanu felt the familiar tension return, not fear, but responsibility. Moments like this could spiral quickly, especially when fueled by misunderstanding. He leaned toward his wife, speaking quietly. "Let's stay calm," he said. "We'll handle this." She nodded, grateful for his steadiness, even as her eyes reflected exhaustion. She hadn't expected to be strong so soon after arrival, yet here she was, navigating judgment from strangers who knew nothing about her beyond what they imagined. Behind them, whispers grew bolder, less restrained. Someone speculated about social media, someone else mentioned staff authority. Each comment layered assumption over reality. The hotel lobby, once a neutral ground, had become a stage, and though neither Keanu nor his wife had chosen to step onto it, they were now unmistakably in view. Keanu shifted his stance, subtly shielding her from the desk, from the eyes, from the weight of interpretation. He reminded himself that this moment, as uncomfortable as it was, did not define them. But he also knew that public moments rarely disappeared without leaving traces. As the whispers continued, one thing became clear. The situation was no longer just between them and the staff. It had taken on a life of its own. And with every quiet murmur passing through the lobby, the story grew, shaped not by truth, but by perception. The tension finally drew authority. From behind a glass partition near the back of the lobby, a senior hotel manager emerged, his expression tight with concern. He had clearly sensed the disruption before fully understanding it. As he approached, the staff at the desk straightened, their voices lowering instantly, their earlier intensity replaced by rigid formality. The shift was immediate and telling. The manager listened first, allowing the staff to speak in hurried explanations, hands gesturing toward the computer screen. The reservation details, the couple standing silently across the counter. Their voices were controlled now, careful, stripped of the sharpness they had shown minutes earlier. Then the manager turned to Keanu and his wife. "How may I assist?" he asked, his tone measured, professional. Keanu explained calmly, recounting the events without accusation. He spoke slowly, choosing clarity over emotion, describing the reservation, the raised voices, and the discomfort that had followed. His wife added only a few words, her voice steady but quiet, describing how unexpected and distressing the confrontation had been. The manager nodded, absorbing the information. His eyes flicked briefly toward the gathered guests, the whispers still circulating like low static. He understood what was at stake, not just a booking issue, but the hotel's atmosphere, its reputation, its duty of care. He asked the staff to step aside. That request alone shifted the balance of the room. The manager reviewed the confirmation papers closely, cross-checking them against the system. His brow furrowed, not with suspicion toward the couple, but with recognition. A small discrepancy appeared minor, technical, easily correctable, something that should never have escalated. The realization settled quietly. He looked up again, this time with a different expression, less formal, more human. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding," he said. "I apologize for the inconvenience." The words were measured, but for Keanu's wife, they landed with weight. Not relief exactly, but validation. Someone had finally acknowledged that what happened was not acceptable. The manager gestured toward a seating area away from the desk, offering privacy. "Please allow us a moment to resolve this properly." As they moved away from the reception counter, the lobby's attention slowly released its grip. Whispers softened, eyes turned forward again. The stage dimmed, but the emotional residue remained. Keanu and his wife sat together, close, speaking quietly. The confrontation had ended, but its impact lingered beneath the surface, proof that even brief moments of disrespect could echo long after voices were lowered. Behind the desk, the manager spoke firmly to the staff, his posture leaving no doubt that boundaries had been crossed. And for the first time since their arrival, the situation began to move not toward comfort, but toward accountability. As they waited in the quieter corner of the lobby, Keanu felt the aftershock of the confrontation settle into his body. Not anger, he rarely let himself reach that point, but a deep, controlled tension that came from holding back words carefully chosen, not to wound, not to escalate. He sat upright, hands resting loosely on his knees, breathing slow and deliberate. Years in the public eye had taught him that restraint was not silence born of fear, but strength shaped by intention. In moments like this, how he responded mattered as much as what had already happened. His wife glanced at him, searching his face. She knew him well enough to recognize the effort it took to remain this calm. A flicker of emotion passed between them, shared understanding, mutual reassurance. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently, a quiet promise that they were facing this together. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said softly. She shook her head. "It's not your fault," she replied, though the hurt still lingered in her eyes. Across the lobby, the manager spoke in low but firm tones to the staff. Keanu didn't strain to listen. He didn't need to hear the words to understand the shift. Authority had finally acknowledged the imbalance, and that acknowledgement alone eased something inside him. Still, a part of him wrestled with frustration, not just for himself, but for how easily respect could be withdrawn when misunderstandings collided with impatience. He thought about how often situations escalated not because of intent, but because no one chose to slow down. He could have revealed who he was. He could have demanded better treatment, but he hadn't and wouldn't. Respect asked for under pressure was rarely respect earned. Instead, he focused on presence, on remaining grounded, on modeling the calm he wished the moment had begun with. A few guests glanced their way again, curiosity lingering but subdued now. Keanu met none of their eyes. He had learned that attention fed on reaction. He would give it none. The manager returned after several minutes, offering an update. The issue was being corrected. A room would be prepared immediately. Apologies would be issued formally. Keanu listened, nodded once. "Thank you for addressing it," he said, his voice even. No bitterness, no satisfaction, just closure. As the manager stepped away, Keanu felt a quiet resolve settle in. This experience, uncomfortable as it had been, would not define the trip, but it would shape how the rest of it unfolded. He would remain attentive, respectful, and cautious, not withdrawn, but aware. Restraint, he knew, was not about swallowing emotion. It was about choosing not to let emotion lead, and in that choice, he protected not only himself, but the person beside him and the dignity they both deserve. When they were finally guided away from the lobby, the noise and movement faded behind them, replaced by the muted quiet of a private corridor. The shift in atmosphere was immediate, almost jarring. What had felt overwhelming moments earlier now seemed distant, yet the emotional weight followed them closely. Inside the temporary sitting area, his wife exhaled deeply, the tension she had been holding finally releasing. Her composure softened, and with it came the exhaustion she had been suppressing since the confrontation began. She sank into the chair, rubbing her hands together as if trying to warm them. "I didn't expect that," she said quietly. Keanu sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. He understood what she meant, not just the raised voices but the sudden loss of dignity, the feeling of being judged without context, the way respect could disappear in an instant. "It stays with you," he replied, "even when it's over." She nodded. The embarrassment had faded, but something deeper remained, a bruise not visible, but real. Being shouted at publicly was not something easily dismissed, especially in a place meant to feel safe and welcoming. Keanu reflected on how moments like these lingered, how they crept into memory unexpectedly, resurfacing later in quiet ways. He had seen it before in strangers, in colleagues, in himself. Conflict rarely ended when voices lowered. It ended when emotions were processed. He reached for her hand again, grounding them both. "We'll be okay," he said, not as reassurance, but as certainty. Still, she stared ahead, lost in thought. She wasn't angry, she was hurt. And hurt, Keanu knew, deserved space rather than dismissal. The manager returned briefly, offering water and a quiet apology, this time directed clearly and sincerely. The words mattered. They did not erase what had happened, but they acknowledged it. As they waited for their room to be prepared, the couple sat in reflective silence. The hotel hallway, dim and neutral, felt like a buffer between the public tension and private processing. Keanu considered how quickly expectations could shatter. A trip planned for rest had opened instead with emotional strain. Yet he also recognized something else, how resilience formed not in grand gestures, but in shared stillness after difficulty. His wife finally looked at him and managed a small smile. "I'm glad you were there," she said. He smiled back, just as softly. Always. The experience had left its mark, but it had also reinforced something fundamental. Respect was fragile, but connection was not. And as they prepared to move forward, Keanu knew they would carry both the lesson and the bond that had helped them endure it. The manager returned with quiet efficiency, his demeanor noticeably different from before. Gone was the rigid formality. In its place stood a careful attentiveness, as though the weight of the situation had finally settled where it belonged. He invited Keanu and his wife to a private office, away from passing guests and lingering curiosity. Inside, the space was modest and calm, soft lighting, neutral walls, a desk cleared of clutter. The door closed gently behind them, and with it, the last echoes of the lobby faded away. Privacy, at last. "I want to apologize again," the manager said, this time without hesitation. What happened at the front desk should not have occurred. The issue was administrative, and it was mishandled. Keanu listened without interruption. He wasn't seeking vindication. He was listening for sincerity. It was there in the manager's tone, in the careful choice of words, in the absence of excuses. His wife spoke then, quietly but firmly. She described how the confrontation had felt, how being shouted at in a public space had been distressing and unnecessary. She didn't accuse, she explained. The manager nodded. "I understand," he said, "and I take responsibility." He explained that internal protocols would be reviewed, that staff would be retrained on handling misunderstandings respectfully, especially when language barriers were involved. It was not a dramatic promise, but it was a practical one. That mattered. Arrangements were made swiftly. A room upgrade, a personal escort, a written apology prepared for record. None of it erased the experience, but it acknowledged its seriousness. Keanu thanked the manager for addressing the issue directly. "All we wanted was respect," he said simply. "That should never have been in question," the manager replied. As they stood to leave, there was no tension left in the room, only a quiet understanding. Conflict, when met honestly, did not need to linger. When the door opened and they stepped back into the corridor, the atmosphere felt lighter, not because nothing had happened but because something had been resolved. And for the first time since their arrival in Colombia, Keanu and his wife felt ready to move forward, not forgetting the moment, but no longer carrying its weight alone. Later that night, the room finally felt quiet in a way they had hoped for when they first planned the trip. The lights were low, curtains drawn back just enough to reveal the distant glow of the city. From the window, Colombia looked calm again and changed, unbothered by the tension that had briefly unfolded within the hotel's walls. Keanu stood for a moment, hands resting on the back of a chair, listening to the muffled sounds of traffic below. His wife sat on the edge of the bed, slowly removing her shoes, the fatigue of the evening settling in now that there was space to feel it. "We didn't do anything wrong," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. "I know," Keanu replied, "and that matters." They talked softly, replaying the night not to dwell on it, but to understand it. How quickly a misunderstanding had escalated, how fragile dignity could feel in public spaces, how easily calm could be disrupted, and how deliberately it had to be rebuilt. What stayed with them most wasn't the shouting, but the lesson it left behind, that respect was not guaranteed by place, reputation, or intention. It had to be practiced, protected, and sometimes demanded not loudly, but firmly. By morning, they decided to leave earlier than planned, not out of anger, but out of instinct. The city deserved to be remembered for more than one uncomfortable night, and they preferred to carry forward peace rather than tension. As they checked out, the process was smooth, almost overly careful. Polite smiles, quiet efficiency, no raised voices. The contrast was striking. Outside, sunlight washed over the street as they walked toward the waiting car. Keanu paused briefly, taking in the moment, the warmth, the movement, the life continuing as it always did. The experience had not broken the trip, but it had reshaped it. It reminded them that composure was a choice, that dignity could be preserved even when challenged, and that leaving a place with grace often mattered more than how one was welcomed. As the car pulled away, Keanu reached for his wife's hand again. They shared a look no words needed. The chapter closed quietly, not with anger or regret, but with reflection. And sometimes, that was the most meaningful ending of all.